Alrighty. And so it is the literal translation of Amen. So we come together today. I just want to share some ideas. The title of the talk is Excellence, Not Perfection. Excellence, not perfection. And perhaps I ought to explain that difference at the get-go, and then we can kind of work into a deeper understanding of it. That which is perfect is as good as it's ever going to be. Right? It's perfect. There's nothing else that could be done. You know, we sometimes use that phrase to describe something. We'll hear a piece of music and say it was absolutely perfect. You know, meaning no one could possibly do it any better. It's as good as it gets. And in our society, we have this idea of striving for perfection. We should strive to be perfect. Never make a mistake. Never admit to making a mistake anyway. But kind of create the illusion that whatever it is that we do is perfect. I spent many years in business, and my role was business improvement. And it was very hard to improve anything that people already believed was perfect. There's no need for them to change. No need to get any better at anything they did, because by God they were perfect. So we want to kind of drift away from that for a moment. We want to think about excellence. What is excellence? Well, excellence is constantly getting better. Excellence is not claiming that we have it all, that we know it all, that there's nothing else for us to know, that you know our way is the right way and the only right way, and all those kind of things that we may have heard in the past. But excellence is continuous improvement. Excellence is getting a little bit better every day, just a little bit better every day. You know, if we could do that, if we could just make a little bit of progress every day, right, then the journey would be joyful, and we would look forward to this thing that the human mind can't comprehend, which is forever. Everything that we know has a beginning and a middle and an end. Everything that we know in our experience on life. And on the one hand, we live our lives as if we're going to go on forever, but we really can't comprehend what forever is. We just can't get our mind around that. And Joseph Campbell kind of tells us that there's a difference between eternal and eternity. And I just want to mention that because it really kind of put things into perspective for me when I grasped that idea. Eternity means it goes on forever and ever and ever. Kind of like the movie Groundhog Day. You know, he just kept repeating that one day over and over and over. Forever and ever. Eternity. But eternal is a sense of timelessness. The divine is not in eternity. God is not in eternity. God is eternal. God is eternal. God is in the now, in the here and in the now and in the present. And when we experience that timelessness, that oneness, that moment of bliss in our meditation, in our prayer, or even in something that we are doing, we lose that sense of time, and we are just being. We are not doing. We are being. Then we are experiencing the eternal. And this idea of the eternal, of arriving at a place in consciousness and then staying there, because we have glimpses as we go through this life. Arriving at that place in consciousness of unity, of oneness, of beingness, of timelessness, then we are in the eternal. And that eternal is forever. It just is. It has no past. It has no present. It just is. This is why Scripture says that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. It just is. Just is. Why when Moses asked the burning bush, who shall I tell the people sent me? God's response was, I am. I am that I am. I am was the highest name for God in the ancient times. See, I am is just a statement of being. Once we refine that statement and we say, I am this, or I am that, or I am this person, or I am that person, now we have limited it, see? Now we have come out of the ineffable, the unknowable, and now we have limited that which is in itself is unlimited. So we want to kind of consider that this process that we're in, or this journey that we're on, a lot of times we talk about it as a spiritual journey or a spiritual growth. It is not for the purpose of perfection. It is not for the purpose of getting to a point where we can say this is as good as it gets. This is it. This is all that there is. We want to recognize that every day, every breath, as long as we are conscious, which our consciousness is forever, as long as we are conscious, we have the opportunity before us to know a little bit more of God than we knew before, to experience God a little bit deeper, to know thee more dearly, more clearly, to love thee more dearly, to follow thee more nearly. Remember the words from Gospel? Just day by day. Just day by day. So the first point I'd like to make is let's consider that what our lives are about. They are about excellence. They are not about perfection. And the reason that I bring this up is we are all members of the human race. We are all subject to the ideas and the beliefs of the human race at both a conscious level, where we take things in and we hear them and we read them and we see them, and kind of a subliminal level, working at the level of the subconscious, which, like Dr. Holmes called that race consciousness, Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious. But because we are all part of the same thing, we are subject or exposed to all sorts of ideas and all sorts of beliefs. And some of the ideas of the society that we grew up in are that hard work is good, we need to work hard, hard work is what brings about success, and also keeps us out of trouble, because Lord knows that idle hands are the devil's work. And this other idea of perfection, not making mistakes. We go through life in society. Well, I mean, just watch the news. Just watch the news, particularly when a politician steps into it and does something. Did you make a mistake? No, never made a mistake. No, everything's fine. Nobody wants to admit to make a mistake, because they're creating the illusion of perfection. And while you have the illusion of perfection, which is a false idea, you could never admit that there's any opportunity to grow. There's nothing better to do. This is as good as it gets. This is as good as it gets. So I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember, but certainly it's on YouTube. Everything that ever was, I think, is on YouTube now. They're going to run out of space someday, I'm sure. But there's an old comedy routine. Andy Griffith, who's a North Carolina native, Andy Griffith did a comedy routine back in the 50s. Remember when they used to do comedy routines on records, and we would go to parties and somebody would bring out the record player and we would listen. And Andy Griffith did a comedy routine called What It Was Football. And it was kind of his, I think, kind of his big breakthrough, kind of how he got exposure into a nationwide audience. And if you've never heard it, kind of the running joke through the whole monologue is that a country boy who has never seen a football game wanders into town when there's a big football game going on. And he wanders into the stadium, and he's trying to make sense out of what he's seeing down on the field. And he sees a bunch of men running around in a cow pasture, and they're chasing a pumpkin. And every once in a while, a convict blows a whistle and everybody stops running. The referee, of course, wears a striped shirt. And he just kind of keeps observing what he's seeing and reporting kind of in his monologue of what he's seeing and trying to make sense out of this that he has never seen before. And it's pretty funny, excuse me, it's pretty funny in itself, but it is also kind of a reflection on how human consciousness works. So we as human beings, we are constantly observing what's going on around us, and we are making associations. We're trying to go back and associate what we're seeing with something that we knew in the past. We're trying to relate what we're seeing to something we may have heard about or read about. And we're forming all of these conclusions about what is going on around us and the way that the world ought to be based on what we see going on around us. And many of those conclusions that we are reaching are wrong. They're just completely wrong. But nevertheless, we believe that that's the way it is because that's how our logic and reason got us there. And then we conduct the rest of our lives. We conduct the rest of our lives as if that's the way it is and that's the way it ought to be. So we do this as individuals, and we don't change those ideas until there's, we used to call it a trigger event, until there's a trigger event. Something happens in our lives that makes us start to question, makes us start to wonder, if the conclusion that we formed was actually a correct one. I'll give you an example. W. Clement Stone had used it in one of his motivational books. W. Clement Stone was the publisher of Success Magazine, and he wrote many of the pop psychology, self-help books for many years. And he related a story one time how he was traveling. He was a traveling salesman, and he went into a restaurant and they had frog's legs on the menu, and he had never eaten frog's legs, but all his friends told him they were good. And he ordered a plate of frog's legs, and they were terrible, absolutely terrible. And he couldn't figure out why everybody was telling him that frog's legs were so good, and they were terrible, and he never ate them again. And many, many years later, he was in a hotel in a different city, and he was with some of his colleagues, and they said, you've got to eat the frog's legs here. This hotel has the best frog's legs in the world. And he says, no, I don't like frog's legs. And they said, oh, you'll like these. So reluctantly, he ordered the frog's legs, and he says to the waiter, he says, now, are these the jumbo frog's legs or are these regular frog's legs? Because I don't like the jumbo frog's legs. And the waiter assured him that they were regular frog's legs. And they weren't. They were jumbo when they came. And he said, he just absolutely knew he didn't like them. He had the bad taste in his mouth from the first time that he ate them. He could remember it. But nevertheless, he had ordered them. They were there. They were in front of him. So he started eating. And he said they were delicious. They were absolutely delicious. And what he realized at that time was that there was something wrong with the first batch of frog's legs. They weren't prepared right, or they had started to spoil, but there was something unique to that particular batch of frog's legs. And yet he had formed his entire opinion of frog legs based on that one experience, and he let it rule his dining choices for the next 20 years. And we're like that. See, the point is how much of what we believe to be true is not true. One of the things we used to do, I was a facilitator of meetings and learning events and things like that. And there's a book I had. I believe the title of the book was called Games Facilitators Play, if anybody's into that line of work and you're interested. But it was all these little activities that facilitators give you when you go into meetings in order to break up the boredom, in order to give you kind of create a teachable moment, we used to call it. And one of the exercises was called a red hat, blue hat exercise. And as people would come in and they would go to the registration table outside the conference room, and they would give you their name or whoever was taking registration, they would go down the list and they would say, oh yes, and they would check off the name, and then they would turn to somebody next to them and they would say, blue hat, and that person would hand the registrant a blue hat. And then somebody else would come along and they would go down the list and the person would say red hat, and then they would give that person a red hat. And people would say, well, what's this for? Why am I getting this hat? And they say, oh, you'll see. Just go inside. After a while, we'll explain it to you. You'll see. Just, you don't need to know that now. So people would put their hat on, red or blue, and they would go in the room and they would start wandering around. And the first thing they're trying to do is figure out who else has the same color hat I have on and who has a different color hat. And they're looking around to see if they recognize anybody in the conference. Do I know somebody? And then after a while they start to mingle. But the way that they mingle is the blue hats get together and then the red hats get together. And then they start talking amongst themselves. Well, why do you think we have blue hats and they have red hats over there? And of course on the other side, why do you think we have red hats and they have blue ones? And they start coming up with all of these reasons as to why they might have that color hat and other people. Well, there's Joe over there, and I know Joe, and Joe went to school in California. Maybe all the people with red hats, went to school in California. And somebody in the blue group says, no, I went to school in California. I got a blue hat. Well, that's not it. So you spend the whole time trying to figure this out. And then when the meeting starts, the facilitator says, now, I know you're all wondering why you got either a blue hat or a red hat, and I know some of you are smart enough to have figured it out. So who wants to tell us what they came up with? And then they go around the room, and you get like a half a dozen people to give their rationale, their reasoning. And it makes perfectly good sense to them. That's what's important to remember. It makes perfectly good sense to them as to what they came up with, as to why the red hats and why the blue hats. And then the facilitator says, well, there actually was no rhyme nor reason to it. The selection of red hats or blue hats was completely arbitrary. We just did that so that you would have the opportunity of seeing how people get together and make up rules and regulations and assumptions that aren't true. And then of course, typically in business, if you're in the business of change and business improvement, one of the things you have to do is learn how to challenge those assumptions. Right? Because you can't move forward if you're carrying the baggage of all of these old ideas around. Now, in our culture, in whatever culture we are born into, our culture also has a great deal of assumptions, beliefs. Right? A culture, by the way that I define it, as a culture is a group of people who have a shared value system. Their deepest held beliefs, their values, so deeply held that they may not even be able to tell you what they are. But they know them, they feel them, they react to them. And this is why politicians campaign on, this candidate is going to protect our values. It's a generic term. It means anything that anybody wants, and everybody nods their head and says, oh, our values, yes. And of course it means something different to everybody. And to the politician it means whatever they want it to mean, depending on what group they're talking to. But there are deeply held beliefs that cultures have, and they share those. And they can't always express those, but you can tell when a taboo has been committed, when somebody has broken a cultural norm. The reaction is usually swift, and it is usually irrational. It's very emotional is what happens. Something needs to be done about that. We need to stop this. And you can see a lot of it if you're on social media. You can see a lot of it where people are generally posting things that says, well, if you're in favor of this, then you must be against that. And it's a non sequitur. The two don't go together. I can be in favor of both things, or I can be against both things, or I can be in favor of one and against the other, or vice versa. But my point is that whatever their deeply held belief in the culture is, in their mind, in their way of thinking, the equation makes sense. If you're for this, you're against that. Even if this and that have nothing to do with one another. That's something, there's a button that got pushed here. There's an emotional response. The only reason I mention that is that we all have those buttons. We all have these things that are deeply ingrained in us. We don't necessarily know what they are. We don't necessarily know how to go in there and find them and uncover them and look at them and say, gee, that's interesting. Do I really want to continue to let that guide my life? How did I come to the conclusion that a certain food is not good, that I don't like it? Maybe there's another alternative. Maybe there's another way of looking. So in our society, there are two deeply held beliefs that we need to explore if we are to fulfill our purpose of spiritual growth. Because these are ideas that get in the way. They don't help us move forward. They help us move forward a little bit. But they get to a point where we can't move any further because of them. And you see this a lot, where people become very successful by doing something, but then they reach a point where they can't go any further. They have to learn a different way, and they can't learn that different way. They can't let go, right? Because they're creating this illusion of perfection. That's as good as it gets. There's nothing better to do. Right? So the first thing we want to look at is this idea that which is hard is good. Hard work is good. We've all been taught that. Our society has built into it a belief that your level of success is directly related to how hard you work, and that if you're not successful, if you're poor or barely scraping by, it must be because you just didn't work hard enough. That you'll see that, right? That's apparent in the way our society runs. And it is so ingrained in the culture, if you think about it. The Europeans got on their ships and they sailed to other parts of the world. And when they got to these other parts of the world, they found people who were living in sort of a virtual paradise. They had learned to live with very little. Their needs were met with very little. If they were hungry, they could pick something to eat off of a tree, or go down to the lagoon and catch a fish. And they weren't trying to build factories or plantations or anything like that to produce more than they needed. They were very community oriented, taking care of each other. In many respects, the life they were living was the virtuous life that was the predicted end result to the Europeans' religion. But the Europeans believed you had to work hard. It had to be hard. You had to work hard to get there. So what the Europeans did was they enslaved these people. They put them to work, and they made them dig for gold. They made them grow sugar canes so that they could send it back to Europe. And they thought that they had a right to do that because not working hard wasn't good. Not working hard, well, that wasn't religious. And the established churches at the time, to some degree, went along with this because they saw it as an opportunity to go bring their brand of religion to the enslaved people. And they justified what they were doing by bringing civilization to these uncivilized people. They were bringing religion and civilization to these uncivilized people. They were making them work hard, which was good for them. And what they were doing was they were satisfying their own greed. They were extracting the wealth of the natural resources and sending it back to Europe. But in their mind, it made sense because hard work is a virtue. Hard work is good. You'll see it again. You'll see it in our society if you've ever been to a multi-level marketing meeting. The idea is if you work hard, you'll get to the top of the pyramid and you'll be making bazillions of dollars a month. And Lori and I had a friend who was involved in every and any multi-level marketing opportunity that came along. We were constantly going to meetings just out of friendship, never participating. And I would look at, I have kind of an engineering background, so I like facts and data. And I would look into it. And I would find in many cases, that the average person was making $100 a year involved in this organization. But they all believed that they just worked harder that they would be at the top. See, there's this fundamental belief that if I just work harder, I can get to the top. And there's some degree of truth in that. There's some degree of truth in the human way of thinking. There's some degree of truth because human beings created the rules and regulations. Human beings share the belief. There's some degree of truth in that. That if you work hard, you can get more than if you didn't work hard. But that's not the spiritual way. See, that's not the spiritual way of thinking. The Tao tells us that doing non-doing is the way to accomplish everything. And we have to look at that and say, well, I don't understand that. Do I have to work hard at non-doing? Leave me alone. I'm working hard at non-doing. People do that with their prayer life. Praying needs to be hard. I need to really work hard at my prayer. I need to go do my spiritual work. Because anything that's of value needs to be hard. That's the fundamental underlying belief in our society. If it's worth anything, it needs to be hard. Gold is valuable because it's hard to get. Sand, not so much, right? Because it's easy to get. Bring water to the desert, and it's valuable. Bring water to the lake, not so much. So the first thing we want to consider is that if we are subject to this idea that working hard is the only way to success, and working hard is the only way to get that which is valuable to us, then we have created a barrier that says, I must work hard at my spirituality. We want to come back to that. I must work hard at my spirituality. The second idea that we find in our society is this idea of make no mistakes. Make no mistakes about it. Right? Just make no mistakes. And it is this idea that perfection is something that we can achieve, or at least create the illusion that we have achieved. You can go into a business and ask people, tell me about the last mistake you made. And you get a lot of silence. I've been there and I've done that. What did you learn from it? Well, if you don't make mistakes, you can't learn from them. So if you're pretending that you don't make mistakes, you also have to pretend that there's nothing to learn. And it was a very difficult situation for us to be able to develop within an organization the openness of self-reflection, where people could look at what they were doing and say, now how can we get better at it? How even if we're doing good, how can we get better? Those kind of things. You'll see this idea carry over into religious philosophies in more of the orthodox or fundamentalist organizations. Doesn't matter whether it's one particular religion or another. All levels, all organizations, all human organizations are going to have an element that is orthodox or fundamental, even sports, even politics. But you see this idea then that our way is the right way. Our way is the only right way. We have the truth with a capital T, and everybody else has a version of truth with a little t, and their version of truth is false. It is wrong. They're being led astray. Very, very, like I say, very fundamentalist approach. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. There's a time and a place for that. There's a time and a place in the growth of human consciousness for that. We need to start somewhere, and that's a start. But what happens is, if you're locked into that, you can't grow out of it. You become defensive then at that point. The only thing you can do is defend, and you see this a lot. You see a lot of preachers who are in the public eye, And what they're doing is spending most of their time telling us what is wrong with everything else, why we shouldn't believe this or that or the other thing. You know, their whole focus is on defending their way of thinking, and the growth becomes limited. So if in our own life, if we as individuals have bought into this, then here's what we find. You know, here's the problem that we find. How do I continue to grow if I've already know it all? How do I continue to grow if I already have it all? How do I continue to grow if some of the ideas that I have accepted, some of the norms that I have accepted, were not true, were erroneous thinking? You know, maybe I grew up in a family that, for example, my father didn't eat frog's legs, and my grandfather didn't eat frog's legs, and my great-grandfather didn't eat frog's legs because 100 years ago somebody had a plate of bad frog's legs. Maybe I grew up thinking something about God that is not true because 100 years ago somebody came to an erroneous conclusion. So what I'm suggesting here is we need to come back and recognize that there are ways that human thinking and the world view the world that may work at the human level reasonably well, but they are not the ultimate truth. Okay? They are, as Paul said, looking through a glass darkly. We're looking through a glass darkly. He also said, when I was a child, you know, I spoke as a child. When I matured, I spoke as an adult. And what we want to do is we want to be able to take a deep breath and step back and honestly ask ourselves, what if everything I knew were everything I think I know? What if it were wrong? How would I know if it were right or wrong? Right? Emerson says, don't take anybody else's word, but you must try for yourself to find out whether you're right or wrong. I think it's John in the Gospels who said, you know, you have to try the gods for yourself to find out if they be real gods or false gods. Can we reach a level in our desire to know God to say, I am willing to throw away everything. I'm willing to throw away everything that I ever believed and re-examine those beliefs one at a time. I'm not going to assume that any one of them is correct, but I'm going to make them earn their way back into my belief system. I'm going to ask myself, how do I know that I know? I'm going to ask myself, what other ways might there be of thinking about this and about looking at this? I'm going to examine it from all sides. You know, it's like finding that gemstone and rolling it around in your fingers and examining it from all sides. See what it looks like from every angle and every possibility. See, I'm going to release and let go of this idea of perfection, and I'm going to embrace this idea of excellence. I'm going to embrace this idea that there's always going to be more to learn. There's always going to be a deeper understanding of God. And I will not hold myself back by pretending that I know it all, that I have it all, or that somebody else had it all and was gracious enough to give it to me. As I do that, as I start to be willing to let go of old assumptions, then probably the first one that I want to to work with, maybe work's not the right word, the first one that I want to explore is this idea that it has to be hard. Life has to be a struggle. We must eat our bread by the sweat of our brow. We must bear our children in pain. Those are the human explanations. Human beings have a great way of explaining things backwards. You have to keep this in mind, explaining things backwards. You can imagine one day that a family is walking down the road past Sodom and Gomorrah, and the child says to its father, what happened there? What are those ruins all about? And the father says, well, let me tell you about the people who used to live there. And the father uses it as an opportunity to teach some version, some morality tale to the child. We do that. Human beings do that. We explain things in the past. We go backward. I remember when I was a kid, a little kid, my grandfather didn't want me to eat a lot of chocolate. So he told me that he one time he actually had to do some work in a chocolate factory. And that the people who worked in the chocolate factory, well, they walked around in the chocolate all day long. It spilled over and it got on their shoes. And there was a special place where people would go and they would take a knife and they would scrape the chocolate off their shoes, and it would go into this big vat of chocolate. And that was the penny chocolate that they sold in the candy store in those days, right? Which, as a kid, penny candy was all you could afford, or all we could afford. What I'm saying is people tend to make up stories. They tend to find a way to make up stories to tell us things because they're trying to mold and shape our behavior. And as little ones, we believe that. And if at some point we don't go back and say, well, wait a second, maybe that wasn't true, maybe that wasn't the only way, then we can't grow past that. So the human way of looking at the world is that life needs to be a struggle. We need to work hard. And that's the key to success. And I just share with you one book I was reading said, if you meet somebody who tells you they made their fortune through hard work, ask them whose, because it wasn't theirs. I mean, think about it. In our society, if working hard was the key to success, then the people who are at the bottom should be at the top and the other way around. So it's not true. It's not true. But what we tend to do is we tend to believe it, and we tend to set up the rules of the game. We walked into the game in the middle, and it was already being played, and we're trying to make sense out of it, and we accept this rule that says we have to work hard. We have to work smart. We don't have to work hard. See, within us is the omniscience, all-knowingness, all wisdom, and the omnipotence, all power. All power, And I want you to think of every great advancement in human life. And there's nothing wrong with human work and human effort and human invention. There's nothing wrong with that. Right? It's okay for where we were in consciousness at that time. What I'm suggesting is now is the time to throw off the old Adam, to put it in biblical terms, and put on the new Adam, to let go Adam being the man of the earth, right? The clay man was what it meant. Throw off the old Adam. Throw off the one who believed that it needed to be hard, that needed to believe that it wasn't okay to make a mistake and to learn from it. And take on the new spiritual being. There is omnipotence and omniscience within us. And the great advancements in the human race come from great thinkers, from people who get in touch with that omniscience and that omnipotence within. Einstein said that imagination was more important than logic and reason. That his great discoveries came from his imagination. Right where we are, all of the knowing and all of the power is. And what it reminds me of is that you and I, it's like we have discovered nuclear power. We have discovered how to create electricity from nuclear energy. And we're using it to power a toy. We're just beginning to tap into it, and we don't understand the fullness of the potential of what is right here where we are. We are told over and over through different teachings, through different ways, doing, non-doing. It is not, I don't do the work, but it is the Spirit within me that does the work. Take no thought of tomorrow, for the Spirit knows what you need. The Father in heaven knows what you need. All things are done. Seek first the kingdom. We are told all of these spiritual truths that tell us that there's another reality. There is another way of viewing the world. And in order to do that, we have to grow into it. Grow into it. Little by little, day by day, we have to grow into it. Emma Curtis Hopkins tells us, sometimes we start to read books of spiritual teaching, and we realize that the world believes that the only way to make a living is through hard work. And she also tells us that the day will come that people will accept their living through spiritual practice, through spiritual growth, through the manna, if you want to put it that way, through the manna from heaven. She says, but if you find yourself somewhere in the middle, you don't stop working. You don't sit at home and fold your hands while your children are starving. You don't sit and meditate while there's things that you need to do, but you do the things that you need to do until your spiritual growth tells you that you can no longer do them. They're no longer necessary. Your ways and means have arrived in your life through a different channel. But nevertheless, we're told that that different channel exists. We are told that it doesn't have to be hard. So our spiritual growth doesn't have to be hard. We don't have to make it hard. We don't have to force ourselves to pray or to study or to meditate. We tend to do that because we think if it's valuable, we have to make it hard. I love watching the children play. They're such good teachers to us. The definition of work is energy that is expended for a definite purpose. That's if you look in the dictionary, that's pretty close to what you'll find. Right? So we go outside and we work in the yard and we sweat in the heat and we cut the grass and we prune the hedges and we do all of those things, and by God, that's work, And then you watch little children go outside and play, and they run around and they roll in the grass and they break a sweat and they come back in and they're filthy and they're dirty and they're smelly and they got a big smile on their face. Now they have spent more energy. They have spent more energy in an afternoon than I can spend in a week. But they don't think of it as work. See? They think of it as joy. They're having fun. So what I invite you to do is consider this magnificent journey, this magnificent adventure we're on as a journey of self-discovery, self with a capital S. We understand that we came into the world just like Andy Griffith walked into the football stadium. We came into the world and something else was going on. Right? We didn't start it. We weren't there when it started. We have no idea what's going on. And we've been trying to figure it out since that day that we arrived. And we've had other people who helped us, who told us their ideas about what was going on, but that doesn't mean that their ideas were right. Maybe that's just what they figured out from when they arrived in the game in the middle, or what their parents told them, or their grandparents told them, or the history book told them. So we came into the world and we arrived in the middle of the game, and we've been told what's going on by people who may not know, whose ideas may be a little bit inaccurate from time to time. And now we are on this magnificent journey of going back and discovering, well, just what is true? What is true for me? Is my truth different than somebody else's truth? Or is there just one truth? Is there just one path? Or are there many paths to the same truth? And we have to kind of be willing to go and explore those ideas. We have to be willing to see for ourselves what is right and wrong, to test the gods for ourselves to see if they be true gods or false gods. We need to explore this idea that the great spiritual teachers tell us that life is not supposed to be a struggle, that we don't have to work hard, but that we have to work smart. We have to go within. We have to find that within which does the work while we are doing non-doing. The flower doesn't work hard to grow, nor does it work hard to be beautiful. Consider ye the lilies of the field. They toil not. They are more beautiful than anything in Solomon's temple. We as human beings do what the plants and animals do. What they do easily and effortlessly and naturally, we make hard. We make a big deal out of it. And it is only until we step into what Thomas Troward called the fifth kingdom, what in Jewish mysticism is called the fourth level, the speaker. It is only until we start to accept the fact that we are spiritual beings, here and now, that we are never going to be more of a spiritual being than we are now. We may experience more of our spirituality. We may express more of our spirituality, but it's already all right here, and it is awaiting our discovery. So we must first accept the fact that we are spiritual beings, and our culture and our society tells us that we are human beings who are stuck in the human struggle in the game for which somebody else made the rules. And we have to play by those rules because that's the way it is. That's the way we do things, you see. And what we have to do is step back away from that and accept that we are spiritual beings here and now. That's the entry point, accepting the fact that we are spiritual beings here and now. That there is within us that wisdom and that power that can keep everything in the heavens in its perfect place and knows perfectly well how to do whatever it is that ought to be done through us and as us, and to provide whatever is needed for us. And our approach to it is a joyful approach. Come as the little children. Our approach to it is a joyful approach, not a work hard, I work very hard and I'll get closer to God approach, but it's a joyful approach. Can we be delighted in discovering a little bit more today of the magnificence of what God is? Catching a little bit more of the beauty today and seeing the harmony and seeing the peace in spite of all the things that are going on in the world that would point to the contrary. Can we find the beauty? Can we find the peace? It's there. It's there. We have to look for it. We have to make that the focus of our attention. We have to turn from one window to the other, so we can catch God being God. So there's an old fable, I think it was Milo, I didn't look it up on the internet this morning, but I think it was Milo was the character in mythology who went out every day and picked up the calf, if you remember this one. And he just went out every day and he lifted the calf. And somebody said to him, well, why are you doing that? He said, well, if I just lift this calf every day, by the end of the year, I'll be picking up a bull. little by little by little, I can make steady progress. So sometimes I think we're sitting around waiting for the big aha moment. The light is going to shine. We're going to be knocked off of our horse, and we're going to have it. We're going to have this thing called enlightenment. And sometimes it happens that way, and I'm not saying it can't. But more likely it happens little by little by little. So I ask you this day, is it your intention, is it your desire to experience excellence? And by that I mean growing a little bit more every day. Every whatever is after we leave here, every interval, every experience, everything we do, can we grow just a little bit more? And can we release the race consciousness idea that we must work hard to do it? Can we surrender to that within us that knows how to do it? Can we give it the time and attention to be still and know and let it direct us and let it guide us and let it lead us where we need to be that day? Just that day, just one day at a time, kind of like the 12-step programs where people are told, just for today, just for today. Don't worry about tomorrow. Don't worry about just yesterday, just for today. Can you keep it together? So just for today, can we be the spiritual beings that we like to believe ourselves to be? That part of us really knows ourselves to be. Just for today, can we find God in everything? Just for today, can we explore the biases of our race consciousness and be willing to throw away and let go of old and limiting ideas? Just for today. And if we do that each and every day, if we do that going forward each and every day, just like that man who could lift the bull at the end of the year, what we will find that each and every day that things get a little bit easier for us every day. But it's not our goal to make things easy, but they do get easy. It is our goal to experience more and more of God. And as we do that, it can't help but things get easier. Can you imagine God struggling to make the universe? Did the sun groan to come over the horizon this morning? Do you hear the blades of grass out in the lawn going, oh my goodness, it's going to be hot today. Here we got to grow again. What for? The guy's just going to come along with the mower in a week or so and whack us down. Doesn't seem to be any sense to this. You don't hear them complaining. They just do what is their nature to do. And it is your nature and it is my nature to discover more and more of God and to express that. To express that not just for our own self-interest, but for the benefit of all. Rumi said that love is like perfume. You can't put it on another without getting some on yourself. So let's go within. Let's look for that inspiration. Let's look for the great ideas that know how to be a blessing in this world. Let's let them come forward through us. Let's let the love of God give itself through us easily and effortlessly to all who we can bless, who we can benefit. And let's let go of the old limiting ideas. I want you to just think about this. The world has been doing things, playing the game according to its own rules for as long as it's been here. We only have about 4,000 years of recorded history, but certainly the world has been around. People have been around the world longer than that. And largely what human consciousness does is it just recreates the same thing over and over and over. Different places, different people, different times, but the same thing over and over and over. Let's try a new way. New to the world, in that the world knew about it, knows about it, been talking about it, but hasn't done much about it in the last thousands of years. Let's go within. Let's find the presence in the kingdom within. and let's see what happens together. This is the reason we have come, and so it is.